Okay, we're going to call this meeting back to order. We are returning from closed session with no reportable action. Roll call.
Councilmember Barnes?
Here.
Councilmember Turner? Present. Councilmember Parnett?
Here.
Councilmember Spur?
Present.
And Mayor Matina.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. Planning Commissioner Michael Green is going to lead us tonight.
Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you are here to speak on an item on the agenda, please wait for that item to come up. If you have some other citizen input, there's input forms at the back. Just fill one out for us. Let's see, acceptance of the agenda. We did make a change to our closed session and canceled item 1. Just want to note that. Is there any urgency items? Okay. Yes?
I forgot to tell you too, we need to pull item, I can't remember what it is, for the Main Street Association.
Item D.
Item D.
D1.
Not D. What is
Which
it?
one?
No,
Why did I
D1
get it
at the
wrong?
end. It's
D1,
It's,
council
Yeah.
business, D1.
it's 6D1.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, there it is, yes, 6D1, sorry about that, lost my space on my
okay.
agenda. They're no longer gonna need additional road closure.
Oh,
And
okay.
they've worked that out, so if we could remove that from the agenda.
Are
we
Okay.
take that.
they still only going to go
First
two
to third.
blocks instead of 3 blocks?
That they don't know till tomorrow, but if they shorten it, then they wouldn't need council authority to make it less. But if they were gonna extend the street space, then we would need to get council authority for additional street closure. So,
Okay, so we have a couple of changes to the agenda. We can take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to accept the agenda as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our consent agenda, we're going to waive the reading except by title of any ordinance under consideration. Approve the minutes of the City Council regular meeting of November 7th, 2017. Approve the warrant registers of November 14th, 2017. Adopt the proposed resolution accepting construction of the downtown tree installation project by Neary Landscape, Inc., and authorize the filing of the notice of completion. Going to reject claim number 2017-005 filed by Linnell Grabels as recommended by REMIF. Receive and file draft minutes of the November 6th Measure Z Advisory Committee. Does anyone want to pull any of those items? Anyone from the public? No, I'll take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to citizen input. Do we have any citizen input tonight?
No.
No? Anyone like to come up and speak on anything not on the agenda? Okay. We'll move on to council business. First, we're going to introduce a proposed ordinance adding chapter 5.34 and amending chapters 17.08, 17.10, 17.11, and 17.13 of the Lakeport Municipal Code to permit and regulate commercial cannabis operations within the city of Lakeport and set a public hearing for December 19th. Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, City Council members. The technical purpose of this meeting is to set the official public hearing date for consideration of the adoption of this ordinance, permitting and regulating commercial cannabis activities within the city. And I just want to bring your attention, there is an error in the recommendations that staff is requesting that date to be December 5th. It should be December 19th is the requested date that we're asking for, the date for the public hearing. Besides that technical purpose for this meeting, probably how the more important function of this evening's proceeding is to continue to offer the community an opportunity to express their opinions and suggestions on this important and controversial topic. In response to the adoption of Prop 64 by California voters last November, and then also state legislative approvals, chiefly among them SB 94, which creates a licensing and regulatory structure for commercial cannabis activities in the state. The city formed a working group to explore how best to address this issue for the city. The working group consisted of 2 city council members, the mayor and the pro tem, as well as the city manager, police chief, city attorney, and myself, the community development director. The overarching goal of that group was to kind of balance that sort of idea that there were several factions within the city that did not want to see commercial cannabis uses, and then there were other factions that did want to see some type of commercial cannabis uses consistent with Prop 64 and SB 94. So the working group established some basic performance standards outlining the different type of uses. I think probably the biggest piece that was recommended out of there was to limit retail sales to just delivery only, and then basically put together some general performance standards which were then reviewed by the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission first took a look at these standards at their September 20th meeting, and the principal concern of the Planning Commission at that time was how much public outreach has actually been given, how much opportunity, and they felt that not enough opportunity had been given, and their principal recommendation was, let's go out and do a heavier campaign as far as letting the citizens of Lakeport know that this was under consideration. As a result of that, staff created a dedicated web page on the city's website with all the cannabis information. We sent out flyers in the utility billing last month or the month before, I believe. We're directing citizens to that website and how to obtain that information. We took an aggressive media campaign, both social media, Facebook, and the police department and the city's page both participated in that. We reached out very heavily to the media outlets who ran several press releases and different articles, and then came back for a joint meeting that your council probably recalls on October 3rd, which was with both the Planning Commission and the City Council to kind of provide staff with the direction on how to move forward with this and also take additional public comment. The Planning Commission then met again on October 11th and then had a special meeting on October 25th, and then finally a last meeting on November 8th. And the principal changes that were recommended by the Planning Commission were they felt that it was probably premature to rule out retail uses in their entirety, and as such you'll see in the ordinance that there are more specific provisions in there guiding different retail uses. Additionally, there was a desire that the working group initially limited commercial cannabis uses to the C3 service commercial and then the I industrial zoning districts. The Planning Commission made some recommendations that certain commercial uses be allowed in the PO professional office district and the C2 major retail zoning districts in addition to the C3 and industrial zoning districts that were already permitted. Lastly, probably another major point to look at was in doing this process, when we first started it, there was not a lot of information out there. A lot of jurisdictions were kind of in the same spot starting, but no one had really put anything forward. Since that time, as we've got nearer and nearer to the state's deadline by the end of the year, there has been a lot more going on at different municipalities. And one of the things we saw developing was this sort of, do you put these performance standards within the zoning ordinance, or do you let them live somewhere outside of the zoning ordinance in your municipal code? There were several advantages that we recognized if we move this out of the original place of having them be performance standards within our zoning ordinance, that we could maybe move them to a different section of the code that would provide us with some additional protections. The chief among that would be, if it's in the zoning ordinance, land use entitlements follow the land, regardless of ownership changes and things like that. If you move it outside of that, you can put in different provisions where you can have different permitting requirements, that if there is an ownership transfer, you would require that they come back and get an additional permit. And so we kind of took a look at that and eventually made a recommendation to the Planning Commission to move the performance standards that we had put and kind of put them into Chapter 5, and that's what you have in front of you. Most of the performance standards related to cannabis would now exist in Chapter 5, which is outside the zoning ordinance. However, there are changes to the zoning ordinance that still require that a use permit be granted, which I recommended highly because you still maintain that allowance to have a legal notice process to neighbors that you might not have in Chapter 5. So at this point, you have a regulatory process where you need to get a specific commercial cannabis permit per Chapter 5 in addition to a use permit, making sure that it's in an appropriate district, still allowing legal notices to go out to residences in the area, and having a public hearing to look at whether or not that's appropriate. So we kind of have both of those going on. So at the end of the day, your Planning Commission only provides you a formal recommendation on zoning ordinance amendments. However, we've been working with them for so long, they kind of gave an informal recommendation in regards to that Chapter 5 as well. So this is the first hearing. As we said, there's no action to be taken tonight other than setting the public hearing, but this is still an appropriate forum to take additional public comments and take any comments from the council, any questions you have. If there's additional information that staff needs to come back with to be ready at that public hearing, this is the appropriate time to do that.
Great. Let's start. Any questions up here?
Just one real quick question.
Yeah.
So when we have the zoning, we have to have a use permit, and then you said the other permit was for the Title V. That was, what was the term that you used to explain what they also need to apply for?
It would be a specific commercial cannabis permit.
So it'd be, okay, so it's a commercial cannabis permit. So you have the two options to weigh
You'd have
in
to-
both
you'd
cases?
How's that both?
Yeah,
You have to have both.
okay, that's what I needed to know. That's just a
Okay.
clarification, thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, one thing that I was looking at your map and all the buffer zones around the parks and stuff, and I was wondering if there's a way for us, thinking in the future, because if we're going to do a revitalization plan of Lakeport itself, to get that as having a buffer zone around that area, or would that be possible at all?
Around
Around what?
Where we're thinking about
Oh.
revitalizing downtown
Oh.
Lakeport,
Like natural highs.
Natural High, Dutch Harbor, and that stuff, can we get a buffer zone around that? And if there's a legal way to do that or not, because, we don't want to go forward and have something stuck in the middle that we don't want in the middle versus, we have this buffer zone type thing. Because once the business gets there, we can't get them out, so.
Well, so are you referring to our lakefront?
plan.
Plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's already a school, so if there's.
I
Well, that was-
already-
I'm thinking that it already was.
It's not being used, so I don't know if that's in there or not.
What-
Looking at
I'm trying to think.
the map.
It's
yeah.
not a allowable area right now, but it doesn't have a buffer around it.
Right.
So to
Need
answer
a
your,
buffer if it's not going to be possible anyway.
So, first of all, you can put a buffer around anywhere you want. That's up to the discretion of the council, provided there's at least 600 feet buffer for schools, because that's the state law.
Right.
And the second thing is that if, for example, you were going to want to change the buffers in the future, that's one reason why we recommended putting the business permits in Title V, because those have, those come up for renewal annually, and they can be denied when things change. Whereas if it's a pure land use, then you get into issues of vested rights where you have more difficulty making those changes. So there is flexibility under this scenario for changes in the future. And then as for what you guys want to put a buffer around, you can add other things in the ordinance.
You can also look at it, if you have it in just C3 and industrial, then that creates a buffer for
Right.
that.
Some of this goes to C2, and there's a lot of C2 stuff. Well, not a lot, but there's C2 stuff.
Through
Where
there, right?
natural high is and
Right.
stuff. So right now, if we went with the C2 is also permitted, then there's a possibility that somebody would open up, and it's a slim possibility, but I mean, there is a possibility that somebody could open up a retail store there. And then once we revitalize, a year after we do that, we're gonna kick them out, basically. And to me, that's not good for the business. And if they knew that they couldn't put one here to begin with, then,
Agreed. I guess maybe,
I don't know, it's,
Why
like
would
I
we
say,
kick them out?
because let's say we didn't want that in our park.
I
That
guess
business.
probably too, the decision of whether you even want anything in C2, that's one decision that council
Yeah, I
needs
think
to look at
maybe
too.
we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take some citizen input and then we can kind of come back to how you see those different zonings fitting.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Any other questions? Not right now. So anyone from the public who would like to come and talk to us? We are going to try and keep it to 3 minutes because there's a lot of people that probably want to say something.
My name is George Smith, and after 50-year residence, this is the first speaking before the city council.
What?
So I hope it's a level of, indication of level of my concern. But really, very in line with what Mr. Spur was saying, my specific residence is on Clear Lake Avenue. And those C2 retail establishments along Main Street, south of Clear Lake Avenue to 8th or 9th, I would like to see eliminated from consideration for the cannabis retail, simply for several reasons, but one, several in the proximity to the residences, apartments, motels, churches, and the natural high area. Thank you.
George, come back. Where would you see putting it or not putting it?
Well, eliminating those C2 business considerations from Clear Lake Avenue down to 8th or 9th, whatever it is, on
Okay.
Main Street.
You're okay with industrial?
Yes, I'm just considered locally the residences, mine, and then the
I was
Sure.
just wondering if you had some input in a broader
No.
sense of what you want to see or don't see.
just personal, selfish.
Personal? Okay, fair enough.
Mr. Honest, George.
Thanks, George.
As always.
He's got a good name. George.
Of course. Who else?
Do you mind me sitting next to you? I should be sitting next to the boy.
We're begging for input.
You were the first. You don't like? Okay. I'll try not to give you these.
I did not fill out a form.
No, you don't need to for this.
Okay.
Come on up. How are you?
Very good.
Good.
My name is Ann Blue, longtime Lakeport resident, 55 years in fact, 50 of it within the city limits. And what I would like to hear, and maybe I'll be honest with you, I haven't had the opportunity to study any of this, get involved with it until tonight and seeing the article in the paper, which by the way didn't give a time. It said this evening, but it didn't give a time. So maybe I should have known the time, but I found out the time. But
Our reporter's out there, so he's taking note.
But my question, the one thing that, well, to begin with, of course, I have to be honest, I just assumed there was no such thing as marijuana, but that's beside the point. I am concerned about the policing of it, for one thing. And my question is, will we have additional police dedicated to helping in control this new industry that's coming to us? We have the money for extra police, which I'm sure we will need.
Chief, do you want to touch on that?
Well, as it sits right now, there's no plan to reduce, to increase police officers just to this ordinance. The police department's been involved in the overall discussions. We were part of the working group that started going through this before it went to the planning commission, and currently believe that there's going to be some very strict security requirements on what might get approved, and we're going to be involved in the issuing of the permits, and we plan to keep an eye on it and try to ensure that there's no issues. If this is new this is new to all of us, so that's something that we would be assessing as we go, and if we see issues, respond to it. But at the time, there's no plan to increase officers just for this.
In regards to the smoking rooms, will we have some type of control? I mean, will the people that are operating the business be responsible, like a bartender, when a person has reached a point where they really shouldn't drive?
Well, we don't even know for sure if those are going to be part of the approval at this point, but those are things that would be part of the restrictions and reviews, and certainly we wouldn't want to have any increased driving under the influence issues with that. So that's something that would be looked at, but at this point, it's unknown. It's before the council to decide what is even going to be approved.
Well, we have a really nice little town here, and I'd like to keep it that way. And if I had my way, we would not be dealing with this right now, but I don't have my way. And I know that we all have a right to say our little piece, and I'm happy to do that. But I just hope that our minds up here are up to really giving us the very best protection that you can. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I think just adding on to Ann's point, I think the heart, in my opinion, the heart of this ordinance lies in what would be now numbered section 5.34.08. And those are the standard provisions for all commercial cannabis uses. It sets out a very detailed, what we call a requirement to submit a very detailed operations plan. That includes a number of different elements, your standard elements such as site plans and setbacks and landscaping and all the typical items there. But in addition to that, it has very detailed provisions on background investigation requirements that are going to be required to be conducted, the submittal of security plans, the review of this by other agencies, including the fire department, building department, to make sure that, especially in the cases of like manufacturing and things like that, where different, chemicals and other hazardous materials are being used, that those are all reviewed, and making sure that they meet all the different standards there, environmental health review requirements. So I think that the heart of this ordinance kind of lies in that section, and that whole idea of this operations plan that's required to be submitted and signed off by a number of these agencies, chiefly among them the police department, prior to even being considered for approval. So before this would even get to the point where the planning commission is considering the approval of a use permit, that application needs to be complete and signed off by these different agencies, with the biggest pieces being that security plan issuance and the background investigation, making sure everything's consistent with the quite detailed regulatory process as well. So I just want to kind of throw that in there, that's, I think, the heart and functional piece. And then you have the other sort of outside pieces to deciding where these uses are appropriate. So those are kind of the two bigger questions.
Okay. Anyone else from the public?
Joe and Peloton, Michael Green. Some other commissioners here, the land use aspects, we've done the best we can as the commission, and we don't need to relitigate that. But there are some things that go a bit above and beyond the land use, and that's, is it a good idea? You know, we kind of covered how would we regulate if we did it, but there's still some questions in the community about why should we regulate, or should we allow it at all? And so I appreciate the concerns. My homework for the last week and for the next 10 years probably is going to be reading about 200 pages of state regulations on top of the 100 pages of the Adult Use of Marijuana Act, and all the conditional use permit applications and good stuff that comes from that. Why we should do it is, although we would like to maybe pretend that if we did nothing, everything would be hunky-dory, I can tell you from personal experience that's not the way it is. Whether we see it every day or not, Lake County, Lakeport clearly suffer from cannabis-related crime, suffer from cannabis-related health consequences that aren't being adequately addressed. And just the general perception, as I've heard a little bit here tonight, that if we're going to allow it at all, this is some dirty thing that we have to keep away from being seen. And I kind of want to flip that on its head a little bit in terms of economic development. If we do a good job in enforcing these regulations, and if we could bring good projects forward, they would be an asset, not just in some industrial area that's out of thing, but it could fit downtown. Maybe not in the mainest of the main street. But before you ban the entire lakefront revitalization thing, think in terms of vitalization. I mean, if we're serious about economic revitalization, this is a historic chance, not to get rich, not to create some cash cow, but to actually bring economic activity into the downtown or into parts of the C2 that are sitting vacant. So definitely the land use aspect is very important. I certainly thank my other commissioners who put a lot of work into it. But the bigger debate is going to be about the why and the where and versus the how. So the why, I would think, is let's let Lakeport take its part in this very historic time, as tedious as it's going to be. Let's take a look where these projects are and see if we can bring them forward in a way that makes sense. But I would hate to kind of see this lowest common denominator cannabis approach. I'd like us to be more open to the idea that economic activity can be a very positive thing, not just in the forest reaches of Lakeport, but also in some of the closer areas where you can get a synergy with other types of businesses. And that's all I got. If you have any questions about regs, I got them, but that's it.
Anyone else from the public? I see more faces out there we haven't heard from. Now's your chance.
Let me say this about the planning commission. I sat in on a couple of these commercial ones, and they spent long hours, and I do mean long hours, hashing out what they have now. And I think they did a very good job. So.
Okay, well, we'll bring it back to the council to discuss it. Now, how far into this, Kevin, do you want us to go? If there's changes we want to make to this, do we talk about that now? Do we wait until the public hearing? How do you want to do this?
You're certainly within your order to take a look at, the specifics of it and
Okay.
recommend changes, and if there's things that you need staff to clarify, you can provide us direction, and we can make sure that we bring that. That's probably the most important. There are things that need to be clarified. We want to know that this evening so we can make sure we have that ready to present at the public hearing as well.
So then the council, this is a good opportunity for us to go ahead and discuss it. There's quite a few changes here to what we looked at last time. So I want to know, what everybody thinks.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things before we get too far into the really grisly details or the minutia. One of the things that I think might be helpful to the public, because it seems like we're trying to make a lot of decisions with, the public is kind of, we're not getting a lot of what we might think that we could use to make decisions. I'm just wondering if there's different, we have the map over on the side with the C2 and C3, and I kind of think that some people are like wondering, what does this mean, and what would it look like? Michael's saying, well, we don't want to get rid of C2, but and George came up and said, well, I don't want the C2 in my neighborhood. What I'm thinking is like an evolution of a map where, okay, we're going forward and we've got all these fantastic, all these line after line of all this voluminous amount of information about everything from security down to the different types of growing and everything there. But I wonder if people are going to be looking at where it could be and then all of a sudden go, whoa, that's my neighborhood. I'm wondering if maybe have a couple of different scenarios somewhere, at the next meeting, or maybe get that to the public through the media or something, say, here's a couple different scenarios that we've looked at, and this is where maybe you live, and these are called buffers, and these are C2, these are possibilities. How do you feel about it? Because I hate to see us say, oh yeah, well, I think C2 and the professional office, and of course C3 and industrial is no problem, and then all of a sudden they look over and they go, well, that's like over in the next block, and they're like caught by surprise. I just want everybody to have an opportunity, because this is, as he said, Michael said, it's a historical time, and we don't want to put any limitations on it, but we don't want any surprises either. People don't go, oh my God, that's on the next block, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't. I'm not saying that, because there's marijuana testing and some kind of business over there doesn't mean that it's bad. But I just want people to kind of have a feel for, okay, this is a possibility, this is a possibility, so they don't get blindsided. That's the only thing I'm looking at. Because when I look at the map, it's like, it's kind of complicated, but you could see where you could almost put it all together in one area. But is that right? Is that fair? Michael's saying, well, we need to get it down on maybe on Main Street. So I just want everybody to kind of know what's coming. So they're not going to go, they just shoved it down their throat and, they didn't get
It's a bit of an unknown.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I'm getting at with different possible scenarios. And then maybe some of these outlying areas, case by case, that are not in the downtown or that are moving up to the limits of the, things like that. I just think maybe that would be useful. I don't know. Kevin?
To add on to that, because there's two things that are going on with the maps. You've got your buffers, which you have, SB 94 provides you the local control to set the characteristics of those buffers. Currently, the buffers are showing 600-foot buffer from schools, parks, and large family daycare centers. But that's not to say that you couldn't reduce the size of those buffers. It doesn't mean that you have the option, you can, require additional buffers around other sensitive uses that you deem desirable. So that's the first element, is the buffer piece. The second piece are the zoning districts in which you are choosing to allow these uses to occur. Now this map is showing C3, I, industrial, C2, and the PO, professional office district. But if you go to your other piece, your matrix, not every single commercial use is allowed within all four of those areas. And we certainly could make different maps for each use to try and help clarify, and it'd be pretty easy to make different scenarios. So I think that's certainly something that can be considered. Staff could do that fairly quickly.
Might help with the visual. So I'm wondering, I know the Planning Commission spent a ton of time on it. The working group started in January working on it, so as well, we put a ton of time into it. And I think the goal was the understanding that half the people voted for it and half did not. And so we were trying to come up with a happy medium. And when we had the first meetings, we didn't have anybody coming out and saying they wanted more. So I'm wondering if you, at the Planning Commission, had a lot of citizen input that wanted it expanded from our original draft. Because this plan is quite a bit different than what we came up with.
We kind of got the same thing we got this evening, and we did a lot of public outreach, but we didn't get a tremendous amount of folks coming and speaking. We did get some, and I don't have a tally, but I would say a vast majority of those that came up and spoke were not in favor of retail, and or limiting retail in different areas. But we didn't get a huge, public outcry, or we didn't get a lot of public input at the meetings. We did get some, more than we were getting before we did our public outreach campaign for sure, but we didn't get a lot.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out why we would add in so many more zones when nobody's asking for it. And I would think moving forward, because it's such an unknown, the why is we have a state law that's passed. The where is totally up to us. And if we, start with some and it works well, later, is it hard to add in more area?
You could always go back and amend these. I would say, if anything, it'd be harder to go back the other. I think there was a comment about, well, if you start implementing some of the lakefront plan, and then we come back and decide we don't want certain uses in those areas. If there's a use already there, it has a legal non-conforming right to, you kind of vest some of those in, so you can't take things away. It's certainly easier to, to add on to it later than it would be to take provisions away, I guess, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we don't really need to dive in. We can allow it for half of the citizens that voted for this law to change so that they have access, they can get it delivered. But for the other half of the citizens that didn't vote for it, then they won't really notice that it's there. There won't be, testing in professional office. There won't be a retail store in, C2. It would be a better fit for what people voted for in Lakeport. And then, I'm sure this is going to be a moving target over the next year. We see, what works here. In the past, medical marijuana, it hasn't, people haven't really wanted to do anything within the city, and we weren't zoned for it, and they just did it in other areas, and it hasn't really been a hub for anything here. But, to go with the half of people that did vote for it, allow something kind of in the draft that we started with. And then in the future, we can always add in more if it's something that seems to be a fit for Lakeport. But to take it away later, if we are in C2 and professional office and say this is not working, that would be very difficult to make those changes later.
So at C2, is it like an all or nothing, or can you isolate certain areas, or does it have to be, if you're doing professional office, it's got to be all professional office, because I know that there's the zoning, but then you said there's the Chapter 5. So, but when you start getting to the point where you're going, oh yeah, we said you can zone it in C2, but you can't get a Chapter 5 approval, it won't give you a permit. Is that something that's...
The areas where these uses would be allowed would be completely within the zoning ordinance, separate from that application. They all have to do the application process that's outlined in Chapter 5, but the areas where they are allowed would all be under the zoning ordinance. Right now, if you look at the matrix, C2, as recommended currently, the uses that would be allowed in C2 with the use permit are testing and general retailer. In the professional office, the only use that's currently proposed is testing. And then all other items are in the C3 and industrial. And to kind of further answer your question in regards to C2, your tool to control if there are areas of C2 that aren't appropriate are looking at your buffers. You know, if there are areas where there's C2 currently that's near some sensitive areas that you don't feel are appropriate for these type of uses, you do have that tool as well. But the mayor's correct in saying that the working group original recommendation was limiting all commercial cannabis uses to the C3 and industrial zoning district, and limiting retail strictly to delivery.
Well, and my question was if there was an outcry from the citizens that they wanted more, then that would be the motivation to add in more zoning. But without that, I see no motivation to add in additional zoning to our original draft.
Well, the thing that, in the different drafts that I've seen to read, it said that there was, and you said retailers general, and the original draft, there was no retailers or strictly delivery. So you're saying like what would be considered a
Storefront.
storefront. And then in the draft, it says a limit of 2.
Right.
Well, we've had no one come and tell us they want a storefront.
No, I know.
Yes, we have. Ron
You
Rose
haven't?
came in and said.
Oh, Ron, right.
He said he wanted to
You're
open
right.
one.
Yes,
He wanted the first permit.
you're right.
Yeah, so now on the zoning matrix, you'll see retail is divided into 3 separate categories. You have the retailer general, which is your traditional storefront retail. You have retailers with on-site consumption, which has been called lounge under various pieces of legislation. And then you have this micro business component that still seems to be evolving what that means, like kind of equivalent to what you would see in a micro brewery, perhaps, where it's a more smaller scale, where they have little bits of each of the components, but it's a smaller scale than a larger operation.
Except with the new regulations, it has now the potential, they added in the distributor license as a component, and you have to do at least 3 out of 4 things: cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and retail. At least 3 of those. So now the micro business seems to really be in flux, because I'd always pictured it as like similar to our wineries and tasting rooms. You cultivate your grapes on your site, you make your wine, you do your tasting room, you do your retail sales there, and it's kind of like an ag education experience for people who visit. But with that new addition of the distribution, you may now be in charge of sort of the coordinating, like the negociant in wine. You're brokering and taking cannabis in, you're responsible for its testing, and then you distribute it to the different licenses. So that micro business,
It's been a moving target.
it's not small
Yeah.
anymore.
No.
Yeah, it has the potential to get really big, so we're gonna wanna watch that one.
Well, the thing that, also in the ordinance that I read, that it said that they could have like up to a total of 5 pounds. I mean, I've known plenty of people that have way more than 5 pounds like in their trunk. And I don't consider that to be like a very viable business. If they had 5 pounds, it'd be like me having like 4 cartons of cigarettes and then I'm done. I don't know where that came from, but the
That's
thing.
the state law, right?
No, that particular item was discussed at length by the Planning Commission as well. There was no consensus that was reached to remove it or change it. But that one, in our review of several different ordinances, we took a look at it. It was common, but that doesn't. There was no other justification other than that why the 5 went in there, and
So it's kind of arbitrary.
I
correct.
thought that one was kind of odd.
Yeah.
as
Well,
well.
and the other thing,
Yeah,
the one thing that stuck in my mind at the joint meeting with the Planning Commission was when Michael was talking about the delivery, it seems like a simple solution. The next thing you know, you start talking about, do you have enough inventory? Do you have all the different products? Do you have enough, do you have change? Are you getting the sales tax capture and all that stuff? And at first maybe delivery sounded like a good thing, and then the more I listened to Michael, I'm saying, well, maybe the delivery thing is like the downside, and actually the storefront thing sounds like, you got everything there, you got your inventory, you got all the different products. They're not going to say, oh, don't you have, the purple kush, and can you come back, and that kind of thing. It's there. You have this. It's in a closed environment and security and all this kind of stuff, and they're not driving out of the town or coming in from the town. So that's the only reason why when I hear about retail, it seems like a little bit more of a controlled environment, especially after listening to some of the seemingly simple things that could go wrong when you don't have, and then somebody like pulls off down a side street and got a side business. I don't know, it's just, when they're there and they're controlled, and that's, not that I necessarily ever wanted to see a dispensary in Lakeport, but if you're gonna do it, it seems like this might be a better way than the delivery, but I don't know that much about it. It's just when he pointed that out, I thought that was something that we need to keep in the forefront of our mind, the different possibilities of things going wrong with delivery and the good things about having it in a retail environment. That's just my perspective of what he pointed out to my.
Yeah. Chief, do you have any comment to that?
I have concerns about the storefront businesses, and particularly if they were to be in the downtown area. But in general, I've got concerns about open storefronts in the city and the lounges as well. I feel that there may be some public concern or public safety concerns with those, and that's kind of where I sit on those two issues.
Okay.
I think the on-site consumption is definitely something that we could put off until the future, until law enforcement at least has measures or ways to determine if you're under the influence when you
Right.
leave that.
So you would
that's
take
my
the lounges
biggest
out?
concern.
Yeah.
Because going to a storefront and purchasing a product that has to leave sealed is one thing. With rules about not consuming it out front of the not consuming it in your vehicle, we can enforce all of those. But when you go to consume it on site, we don't have the setup now for police protection. And, that's such a gray area still, because the studies are just getting going.
So when you're saying consume it, are you talking about smoking it, or are you talking about eating it?
It could be all of it. On-site consumption. Could
In a
be,
lounge,
yeah.
it could be, yeah.
You could be chewing a cookie or eating a gum bear or, smoking it. It's consumption in any of its possible ways.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
So, George, how do you feel about the lounges?
I think that it's something I don't think we should have, actually.
Okay.
I think that what she was saying, that if they went in and bought a package of brownies that they took home to eat, then that's okay. But for them to just sit there and get as happy as they can and then get in their car, that's going to be a bad thing.
Okay. Does anyone want the lounges? Tim?
I'm not opposed to it, personally.
Okay.
I sit on the fence with it, it's one way or the other. To me, it's right up there with a bar. And I can do with or without a bar too. So.
I can totally see where the people that drink and hang out in the bars, and then people that go in and go, well, you guys smoke, you guys drink and drive, do all this stuff, and we smoke and drive, blah. So the argument can be made either way, and I totally could understand that. The idea of putting it off, I think is, unless we get pressure to do it, because I totally see your point. If you're a drinker and you go to the bar, if you're a smoker, you go to the lounge, what's the difference? But if we're not getting any pressure to do that, no one's coming up saying, hey man, the first thing you need to do is put it in the lounge, man, because I want to go get high, I want to blah, blah, blah. You guys
I thought we were talking more long-term, in the immediate, until we actually have all of the ways to test for it.
You'd rather wait.
I'd rather wait until
Yeah.
we have
And
all the
like you said,
protocol put in place.
It's easier to add to it than take away from it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, totally. I think this is something we don't need to
But
be
it's not
rushing.
something to exclude forever in the future.
It's not like this is our last chance to do this stuff, and that is kind of how the original draft came to be, with Chief's input of, what's safest, and with the fact that we don't know how some of these things, and they keep changing. Is that a new amendment that you're talking about?
That was in the state regs that just came out on Friday.
The
The
emergency
three binders
provisions.
that Michael just showed us.
That's
Okay.
the stuff right here.
Okay,
Can I speak briefly on dispensary delivery?
sure, come up.
It's been lengthy.
Sorry.
Bring it.
You can go back to like we did at
Good one, George.
And the regulatory ordinance, one thing would address if we allow delivery here, what would that look like? And, but what we don't have in the commercial ordinance or the other ordinances, what about all the deliveries from other parts of the state? And part of what we don't know about delivery is we're gonna have deliveries flying all over the state. And I know in the North Coast, Sebastopol in particular, there's people setting up shop with the idea that they just got a little storefront and their business model is to deliver in all these other places. To the idea that you're not getting people clamoring for one business model or another, I just want to remind you that people are not going to stand up here and out themselves as cannabis users to demand a commercial activity that they probably don't have a real chance to get. As a patient myself who has utilized dispensaries and even worked in some, there are people who use it for medical purposes. There are seniors who come in who don't know what they want. There are veterans who come in and actually need some consultation. And the idea of a bunch of, people flying around their little Geo Metros with a bunch of weed in the trunk, it doesn't necessarily appeal to me because I don't think you're going to get the good patient care for those who actually need it. And I think there are security concerns that are every bit as serious with that as there are with a storefront dispensary that represents a hard target, security cameras, physical separation from the retail area and the general public, cash handling, and all this stuff. So I personally, and I'm dealing with this every day, I have more concerns about delivery by far than I do about storefront dispensaries. It's much more mature as a business model, and I think for a regulating agency, it's the better mousetrap. I'm open to the idea that people can disagree on that, but I don't want you to mistake the idea that just because people aren't up here clamoring for dispensary versus deliveries means that you've got the final word on this subject. There are still people
I
who
keep
don't
bringing it
understand.
up because it's so strange, the drastic difference. When we were doing our medical marijuana ordinance, this room was packed, every time, packed, and everyone came up and spoke. And no one was afraid to speak. We heard from everybody. And working on this, it's been tough to.
Well, and part of that's your own aggressive deadline. It's the week before Thanksgiving. So again, going to the state's January 1 deadline. If you want to put it off and think about it after the new year, I'm all for that. But if the idea is you need to plow forward and get something on the books before January 1, okay. But I don't want you to. I personally would hate you to make a decision based on lack of input and think that people don't have feelings about it. And your example kind of proves the point. People do have feelings about it, so they either have confidence that we're doing a good job in flushing out these issues, or guess what? They still have jobs, they still have drug testing policies, they have school teachers watching the video. They're not necessarily going to stand up here and beg for this stuff.
That's a good point.
Well, and it's very much the difference between coming out and advocating for marijuana as used as medication versus recreational use. To stand up and advocate for it.
But the
There's still
retail
that
stores that do
social
both.
stigma,
Yeah, I guess.
For
I don't know.
people who-
It wasn't that way last time. It's kind
It
of
wasn't.
interesting.
Maybe they all have medical cards.
Maybe,
Maybe I'll come out.
maybe.
So we kind of like decided that we wouldn't go with the on-site consumption. Is this idea of having the delivery versus, and Chief voiced his opinion against having a retail outlet, two retail outlets in the town of Lakeport. I don't know if that's like, there's a total of 10 pounds of weed totally involved in both of those. I don't know, is that something that we should take as a separate thing? Because it seems to be one of the only, because most of the other stuff seems like they've handled every single detail on it.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, the big question is, do we have strictly delivery? Do we have delivery in retail? Those two things seem to be, because all of the voluminous amount of information that they've sifted through and put together is just incredible. I can't believe. Of course, after talking to Michael after 4.5 hours, I think you were at that same meeting, it was 4.5 hours long. It's like, yeah, that's how they got it done. But that seems like maybe a decision that we need to maybe focus on or get information on about whether or not we want to have those two retail outlets or strictly delivery. Is that something that we need to get more information on, or do we have feelings on it now, or do we not want to put it in now and take it out later? It sounds like Michael, who's been involved with this forever, thinks it's a good thing. Chief doesn't like it because it's
I would go back to our original draft because we have not heard enough input to motivate us to do something different. And we need to really picture what do we want to see in Lakeport. And when we're adding something that we don't totally know what it looks like, then, you know, why would we do that? Why wouldn't we wait? We can do, you know, a middle ground is what that original draft was. It allowed people access, it allowed businesses to come in, but it wasn't gonna be next to George's house. Chief wasn't gonna have to worry about the retail. And then, you know, this is gonna continue to change and we can always add in more in the coming years. As it, you know, we can keep adding to it. Taking it away is gonna be quite challenging.
In your original draft, did you use the Title V?
No, the original recommendations from
Zoning.
was just zoning, but I think those were separate issues.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. We definitely stick with how this is. Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, our
Sorry, what'd
original plan, sorry, George, our original plan didn't have the 2 limit either. I'd be interested to hear how that came about.
Yeah, we have no retail, right?
Well, no, we had retail delivery only, but we didn't have
Yeah.
a limit of 2 per city. So I don't know
Right.
where that came from. Was that a result of public input, or was that something the planning commission struggled with? Or?
Well, it evolved because there was some struggle, the same struggle you guys are going through right now is, you know, is retail appropriate? And I think they used the limiting to 2 as their balancing. I don't want to speak completely for them, but sitting through those meetings that, you know, they were struggling with the same factors, you know, is there a demand for retail? Should it be allowed? And their sort of compromise was agreeing to draft provisions for retail, but recognizing that, you know, having, you know, 5 or 6 in town was going to be a major impact versus, you know, limiting it to 2. And we looked at several other different jurisdictions, and there seems to be, especially in our area, the areas that are considering retail storefront, they do have limits. I think we borrowed specifically from Cloverdale's ordinance on the limits, the 2, and then some of those other provisions in that same section.
So you're saying in our original one with the delivery, there was no limit on
We didn't have a
the
limit of
micro
number.
businesses that can deliver?
And I go back and forth. I know that cannabis is its own unique animal. It's an unknown industry. It's new. But I try to remember how we deal with controlling or regulating businesses in general. So, just so I kind of, like, we're paralleling. And we've got how many auto parts stores now? You know, we don't control that usually. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't control this one. I just want to be really cognizant as we move forward that we're not being random. You know, that we have a reason for the rules that we put into place that aren't standing in opposition to how we normally encourage economic development with all other types of businesses in the city.
I would absolutely agree with that. And when I went through the draft, I highlighted the 2, not because, for the very same reason. I'm saying, well, this seems very arbitrary. Why would we limit it to 2? We have the, you know, the Chapter 5 and all this stuff. And for that same reason, this is a free country, blah, blah, blah. It's a little bit different because it's marijuana. And so that was the number one thing. But I was assuming that, well, this looks like the draft and we're going to go forward. And I'm thinking, well, why only 2? Maybe 3's better, or 4.
Plus, yeah, that 2, then does that count a micro business that has a retailer as well as, like, say, if we did only do delivery only, it's going to still be either medicinal or adult use. And according to the state, you can co-locate. So how do we deal with that? If we've got an adult use and a medicinal, even if it's just delivery only, does that count as our 2 retails?
I don't want to speak directly for the planning commission, but all of our discussion related to limiting to 2 was generally in regards to storefront retail. That was most of the discussion in regarding that limit was in regards to.
So that means there could be 2 storefronts, plus there could be the micro businesses that are delivering?
No, I think that it was more looking at not having more than 2 storefronts. I don't think there was any discussion you know, that if you had a delivery only, that now all of a sudden you don't have one. It wasn't hashed out in that same fashion, but all of our, just to kind of to lay it in there, is that the discussion regarding the Limited 2 was always in regards to storefront retail.
The only other business that I know that to consider saturation, that we have to sign off on is ABC licenses.
Yeah.
Those,
So that's a similar,
so that's the only business
That's
also
correct. And
that
that's a
there's a
similar type
regulation on
situation.
how many you can have, but we don't have a number, but we do have to sign off that we're not being saturated by other licenses in town, so.
Right, but
That's
no
the only
such-
business.
no- Yeah, that similar situation hasn't been set up for cannabis on regulations.
Correct.
Ken?
Hi, a little clarification. Why we came up with the number at all was, the discussion was no retail at all. However, if there was to be retail for your consideration, that's where the cap came in, and how many would there be? Under the assumption that it was a cherry-picked idea where you would decide whether yes or no. If you said no, no big deal. If you say yes, we're recommending 2 based upon the idea that we have 4,500 people here. It's not a large industry as it is, so right now, it's a good starting point. Cap can be changed. If there's no cap, it can't be changed. So that was the idea. It gives you an option of whether you want it or not. So if you don't want it, no big deal. If you want it, we thought 2. So that's what it was about.
so do I understand this properly between the two of you? If we had, let's say we had the opportunity to have retail, but we could still use, the application process and say, well, we just don't like the way this looks, or, even though it fits like most of the criteria, you could just deny it.
So our job was to look at this as a nuts and bolts measure and say, of all of the possible working parts that we can present to you to look at, let's do our best to flesh this out so that you can pick what you want out of it. You can take it all in a whole, or you can say, we like this, we don't like that. But our job was to take a look, and several meetings at 4.5 hours, and I mean, it was a big deal, to give you that rounded look. So you have the ability to ban the whole thing if that's what you want to do, right? Or you can pick this zone specifically if that's what you want to do. It's totally up to you. So we were giving you options, what we thought would be the most reasonable way for disseminating information. And that's what it came up to. The C3 and the I was the original, and that worked for us. And everything would fit in there. But then we started thinking big picture, like, okay, we write this ordinance 10 years from now when it's no longer smoke and it's just straight out edibles and the psychotropics have been removed, what industries, at least we have it in place that you can look back on and say, well, they already did the work, let's just put it in. So you have the total ability right now to pick and choose what you want to do with it, and that's what we were doing. So the cap is the cap only because if there was one, it's a starting point. But you have every ability to say 1, 2, 3, 4, none. It's up to you. So that was our thinking behind it.
Thanks.
The one question about storefront delivery. If we say that there's a cap of 2, does that include delivery? And if that includes delivery, how do we do that if somebody's getting it delivered from out of county?
I would agree that's not clear right now.
Okay.
Going kind of what Ken's saying, we were kind of, planning commission was kind of throwing a lot of different options in there. As I recall, this discussion on Limited 2 was always in the context of dealing with storefront retail. But I would agree that if the council decides to stick with this, we probably need to clarify that a little further.
Can we interrupt this? We have a little family emergency. We're going to take a 5-minute break and then resume. Okay, we're back. A little car accident, but everyone's okay.
Except for one.
I'm just a little shook up. We will distract you now with a discussion on cannabis. All right, where were we? Kevin, you were telling us something.
I don't believe so.
That's all I'm going to say
Okay.
about that.
I think David's been
I thought
dying
we
to...
were speaking about deliveries, and the question was whether or not what we can do about deliveries. And I guess the point I just wanted to make is that under state law, we can't prohibit a delivery company from using Lakeport's roads to travel through Lakeport. We could either ban deliveries completely, but if we're going to allow a retail use with delivery, I think it would be problematic to ban deliveries that originated outside the city, but not those.
Problematic.
That's a euphemism if I ever heard one.
The other discussion item, I think, was, in regards to the specific provisions that are covered under retailers. Right now, it currently says no more than 2 cannabis retailers shall be permitted within the city limits at any one time. That was the other discussion that was going on.
And we determined that to be storefronts, basically.
Well, that's everything that,
I think it's
that was-
ambiguous.
It's ambiguous right now, but
And the council would be wise to clarify that, because as I read it, retailers is a defined term, cannabis retailer is a defined term in this ordinance, and it would include delivery. So when I read that, I read it to mean storefront and non-storefront delivery.
I agree, that's the way it reads right now.
And
If you look at number 1, the use types kind of define what a retailer is, and that's retailer storefront with sales of cannabis, cannabis products or devices, retail storefront with the delivery of cannabis and cannabis products or devices, retailer delivery of cannabis, cannabis products or devices, storefront retail with on-site consumption, and then micro business with retail included. All those right now are collectively considered retailer. And so that next provision, no more than 2 cannabis retailers shall be permitted within the city at any one time, would include all those. So if the first 2 that were approved were delivery only, then we would not, according to this, be able to take an application in for a storefront. So yes, there's some ambiguity there.
There's so many things that are unclear and changing. The way that I look at this draft is that it's something that maybe we would consider in the future, like, way out as we see how things work. Right now, we need something to give to the state for January 1st of how we want to roll this out now. And that original draft was kind of allowing a little and, not some of the others in a smaller area, so we can try it and watch as these things change and become more clear. If we could continue this discussion right after that and talk about adding things in and get more public input and add it in later. But I don't see why we would rush to add it in and to try all of these things right away.
If it makes it easier, what staff can do for the next meetings, we can provide both alternatives. We can bring you the cannabis working groups language specifically for limited to delivery only, and then side by side with that, with what was recommended after the planning commission meeting. So you'd have them both in front of you, if you think that would be helpful.
Well, we could get more input too in the meantime and see, how are people feeling about it? What direction do they want to see their city go?
Can I give a little input, please?
Sure.
I'm surprised to hear you say you want to go back to the working group. We put a lot of work into this. We were building on the tops of what you did as the working group. We're trying to move forward with a deadline. At the same time, I'm hearing that, whoa, we need to stop and think about this. We put an awful lot of time into this. I don't expect you to adopt this. The Planning Commission knows that you guys were the final word. What we hoped to do for you was to bring common sense ideas to this group and let you make all the final decisions. All we did was take what was put in front of us and hash it out. And we asked for an awful lot of public opinion. We're very surprised at the poor turnout of the public opinion that we got. We're very disappointed with it. I really would have loved to have had more public opinion. I felt like in the beginning, moving forward with this would be bad for the people of Lakeport, and that we'd get skewered later. And I've just come to realize that from all the great work that Kevin and his staff did, putting it out there to the city, to the residents of the city, that either there just isn't more public input. I mean, that's what I would say to you tonight, is that we've looked at this. We would love for you to look at it and pick it apart and make changes to it. That's what it was intended to do. The limit of 2 is the small stuff that we're dealing with. We tried to put in front of you the best common sense ideas that we could. We also have 5 citizens that were inputting on the planning commission. We're citizens also. And when we didn't have a lot of public input, we had to look and fight with each other and come to a consensus, and it wasn't easy. And we've got a lot of time into this. And I hope that you'll look closely at it and fine-tune what we've done and make it better and move forward with it.
One of the suggestions from the planning commission that I like, that we didn't really talk about in the original working group, but I think it's just because we didn't think of it, was the testing facilities in professional office. I've visited testing facilities in Santa Rosa, and I think that they would fit in just fine. The amounts of the cannabis that they're testing are so small that we wouldn't need to worry about this large, bank of unsecured cannabis on site. And it could kind of look like when we go into Quest, for your blood transfusions. It's clean, it's bright, you get lab geeky guys all over the place. It's fine. I don't see it as a threat or detrimental to the character of the city, so I'd support that inclusion.
Could be a good business.
I agree, yes, and it could be a good economic development opportunity to train some of our workforce now in more of a lab-related industry that they could go on and take further, wherever they go.
Yeah, you're right. We never came up.
Right.
Well, along the same lines, you've visited one of those. I haven't visited a cannabis dispensary, but when I think about the 5 pounds and then I think about counseling and different things like that, maybe it would be helpful if we had some kind of, input on how many square footage are we talking about? I mean, with 5 pounds, I can't imagine that you'd need more than.
I think it's a minimum of 1,500 or a maximum.
No, but I'm saying, but actually, how much? What would be the average? I mean, if you're paying 1,500 and you only need, 250 square feet because you only got 5 pounds to display and some gadgets and tools and stuff. I just and then what would it look like from a security standpoint? And if we were putting it in strictly in C3 and industrial, which is way out, and away from downtown, near the police department and so forth, it's what kind of security would that present, and what kind of, why would that be a bad thing, and how would that look? Getting some kind of input on that would be kind of nice to say, well, what is it going to look like? I mean, is it going to be 1,500 square feet with 5 pounds in there? I don't know. Or does anybody think that would be helpful, or is it something they just want to take off the table? I just don't know.
I think the 5 pound limit, I can't remember if it was at this meeting where we met with the planning commission, or if it was at a county meeting, because all my cannabis meetings get mixed up. But there was a gentleman who came and spoke in public input and was saying that as a retail business owner, it was challenging to be held to that 5 pound limit, because he was not able then to take advantage of, say, dips in the market to invest in the cannabis to present, and so that was really challenging, just as a business owner type of thing. And my understanding, or the way I see it, is if we have the security measures in place that keeps this safe and keeps it from becoming easily accessed by other people who are unlawful in intention, then the 5 pound rule really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'd recommend its removal as we move forward, or at least more further consideration on that point.
Well, for one thing, 5 pounds of marijuana now is not going to motivate anybody to break into any building of any magnitude if it has any kind of security, because the cost of marijuana is so low right now. It's not like breaking into a bank and getting a bunch of gold. We're talking about stealing from the Goodwill or something like that practically and taking out old clothes. It's only, a couple $1,000s anymore. But I'm just saying that this is something that if it were like vanquished out to industrial and C3, would that still be something that the chief would have a problem with? Or is it because I wouldn't want to see it like downtown right next to Logan's or something, and then people are going in and out and doing different things. But is that something that might work? Because I have a real problem with I just don't feel that the delivery thing is like this golden child. I really feel that it's something that's so nebulous and so uncontrollable, and then there's traffic issues, and there's...
Well, there's going to be delivery...
Regardless, yeah. But what I'm saying is it's not the fix-all. And it would be like saying, we have a pizza parlor, and but I only have pepperoni on board, and that's all I have left. And whereas back at the plant where we have the whole pizza thing, we've got 35 different pizzas, and this is probably the one you need. I just don't want to leave something out that is providing something for veterans and people that are seriously ill and things like that, because we thought that nobody asked for it. If we stuck it in C3 and industrial, would that be such a bad thing? And we still have the ability to overdo that. I don't know.
So you're saying storefronts in C3 and industrial?
Yeah, strictly, which is way out of, it's not a concern for George or any of these people.
Right.
Well, we did talk about that in our group, didn't we? And the reason that we took that away was because of chief and the toll on the police force. We're trying to make it a fit for our city, for our citizens, for our staff, for our police force, that it all works together.
But I hate to say this, but I think that stigmatizing a marijuana cannabis store as some kind of like crime center may not be very rational. And I would like to see some statistics on well-run business. I'm not saying that they don't have issues. If you got them down in Clear Lake previously, maybe it's a problem, but stigmatizing it as like, oh, this is going to be a burden on the police force from the get-go because they're selling marijuana. It's like, I think that could be dangerous kind of like characterization of something that's not necessarily maybe real. I don't know. I really don't know. But I kind of tend not to want to say that kind of stuff out loud, because that's like saying, well, these people are criminals. We're giving them a permit, and there's going to be all this police action.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody said that. I think...
Well, it's kind of like inferred, and I feel that it's been inferred very heavily, and I don't know that that's a fair characterization of the new marijuana, like the new normal, kind of thing that we're coming into. I just don't know if that's a fair assessment. Maybe it is. I'd like to see some statistics on how much, crime is brought in lately with the new dispensaries, with the, that have happened. Maybe they haven't happened yet. But there's some out there, and maybe it's a big deal. I don't know.
Could we get that information from Clear Lake?
And I don't know if that's a characteristically, because the crime statistics in Lakeport are lower than Santa Rosa, and the crime statistics in Clear Lake are far higher than Santa Rosa, so it's not...
No, but specific to the dispensaries that have been there for a few years.
That's what I'm saying, in a city similar to ours that has them, but that doesn't have normal high crime like Clear Lake does.
Well, the chief probably wants to...
We can make some requests on that information.
I just, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I disagree with anything you've said. I just feel a little bit uncomfortable characterizing future marijuana dispensaries as some kind of like, hive of scum and villainy, something like that, where it's going to be a crime thing.
Well, I think we need to keep in mind that what we want to work with the people who want to operate legally. That's the whole point of this project. Yeah.
And I just think that I don't like the idea of going, well, let's just wait and see, and I thought Michael made a good point about someone coming up and saying, well, I don't want anybody to know that I'm doing this because I work, with a school bus or something like that. People aren't going to be charging in here necessarily until there's a known opportunity to maybe get a new job or a new business or something like that. So I don't know. I just think if it were relegated to something like C3 and industrial out there, I don't know that it would be that bad a thing if all the regulations that they have, these voluminous amounts of controls and security and stuff, I just don't know. I think it needs to be maybe discussed some more.
So I was looking at this map, and it seems as though all the C3 and industrial are in a pretty concentrated area. What about, so we have all of these, thank you, buffers. What about creating a buffer around one of these industrial or C3 areas that allow the C2s within that buffer to operate as a storefront? I don't know, I'm just to kind of.
Buffer?
Yeah, a reverse buffer
Yeah.
to kind of
Dark hole.
concentrate the activity in that, in that one area away from downtown. That way nobody's upset about it being downtown or toward residential.
Well, actually, if you eliminate the 11th Street Shopping Center and you eliminate the part that George talked about, you've essentially done that. You've essentially done that. You have it all concentrated. So you could have C2, C3, and industrial all in that same area because everything else is either buffered or not allowable. So
We could create a commercial cannabis overlay zone that would then show clearly where we prefer to see these businesses located.
and it's almost there.
Yeah, we've
With
got a lot of
C2,
buffers.
C3, and of course you pull out the buffers, and so there would be a couple of hollow spots in there, but it's highly concentrated right there, as I said, about the 11th Street Shopping Center in the area over there along from Clear Lake Avenue to 9th Street. So
How would the overlay zone work?
Kind of similar to the way we have our shoreline protection overlay district, that, you don't eliminate the primary zoning, you just recognize that there are special features of parcels along the lakefront that need additional protection. So you'd be kind of creating an equivalent, an overlay district or a special combining district for commercial cannabis, and then you would define your areas.
So you wouldn't be picking this zone, this zone, this zone, you would just have an overlay?
It's an inverse buffer, essentially. You'd be looking at, kind of looking at a specific area, which, it is pretty concentrated in that south area.
now I noticed that I think David put in there, I don't know if he amended it, but I saw in there in blue that 1-year contract renewable or however that was. If there were problems and it found out that chief was impacted in the police force, then that renewal of Chapter 5 would be suspect, and you could go through with a myriad of different reasons why they couldn't get their thing renewed, because it's annual.
That was one of the advantages
that was
throwing
the
in Chapter
idea,
5. Yeah.
is that it makes it easier to, instead of revoking a permit, the permit expires, and if you're unable to show that you are eligible to have it continued, then
Yeah, because see, that, I thought that was a good addition as far as the safeguard goes. If there's any issues and you do have a problem, even though you're in C3 or industrial and there's a problem in end of the year.
I mean, to be clear, the city can't revoke a permit arbitrarily and capriciously. I mean, there has to be a rational basis, and I think that the provisions in here lay out rational reasons why the city could revoke it, and so it would have to be based on.
But it would be similar to an ABC license that was having problems with brawling and, people drunken driving and so forth, and they would do a finding and say, well, this has got to stop, and there'd be different.
Yeah, and hopefully we could, if there was something that egregious, then that could be grounds for immediate suspension.
But I was thinking more along the lines, if it turned out that it ended up being problematic and we had 112 visits by the PD and so forth and so on, and that would be obviously egregious, but if at the end of the year it'd be like, we're coming up for, it expires, now you gotta reapply, it's like, no way. And then, anyway, these are just.
Okay, well, here's kind of where we're at with this draft. I think we were all okay with the testing facility and professional office. Is that right?
Yes.
And did we say we want the lounges out?
Out.
Everybody says
Temporarily,
lounges
at least.
out.
Yeah.
So I think the only thing that's been up for discussion, and maybe we'll continue to discuss, is retail or no retail, how many, and in what zones.
And defining them more, or refining our definitions so that they're not so nebulous.
And how delivery works within that. So those are the things left. Chief, were you about to say something?
Well, I was just, when I get a chance, I wanted to
Yeah,
say.
add to that. Is that kind of where we're at right now?
I think so.
So,
Well, what about the C2
Overlay?
overlay thing? Are we doing that, or are we putting a buffer around?
well,
around the
I
street?
mean, I think the zoning, that is undecided still. Overlay or what zoning, retail, no retail. And maybe we just have that come back in a different color in the draft, and we continue to think about that and talk to citizens and discuss it next time. Chief, what were you gonna add?
No, I just want to go back to Council Parlett for a minute on the, unfortunately, I don't have stats here now to give the council on what, any kind of crime numbers that I feel may happen at those, but in going over this and being part of the discussions, I felt that the retail establishments would probably elicit more of a need for police responses than these other types of businesses that, like the testing or
Oh,
the other stuff.
So you're just saying relatively, it's a relative thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just if there's anything gonna have a problem, it's gonna be at retail.
That's what.
And I would
that's my
agree with,
feeling.
and I would agree
That's-
with that.
That's
yeah.
my feeling, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of stats, even from other areas right now to go on. I mean, we can certainly reach out and try to get some information on places that have had the medical marijuana and see what kind of issues may have happened there. I am aware, in following some of this stuff, that I've seen cases where there's been robberies and other issues at those locations or outside of them when either business owners or customers were coming and going.
It's my understanding that a lot of the issues arise from the fact that these are all cash businesses, and they have to be because marijuana is still a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law, and so no bank that's FDIC insured can have these people's money. So there's often a very large amount of cash at these locations, in addition to the marijuana itself, which is also can be a target for people who are interested in acquiring it by means other than a cash transaction.
And I believe that's related to some of the cases I've seen or read about in other areas. And that was just my opinion that, I'd like to see more time on that, before we jump into.
Well,
That's just my opinion.
The thing that when I live over on the Lost Continent over in Lucerne most of the time, and I could probably give you a list, I won't, but I could give you a list of a number of people that, 10, 15, 20 pounds, 5 pounds is like nothing. If they were gonna steal it, they go to some of these unsecured people, but everybody has it, so why would you steal it? It just seems kind of like ludicrous to me that someone would camp out in front of an industrial area and wait for the guy to walk out when the most he could possibly sell in one day, at 5 pounds would be some finite small number, well under, 10 grand or something like that. It's like, really? It's crazy when there's people that carry more money than that in their wallet. And these other people over in Lucerne that have, and all up in the hills and in Upper Lake, they have far more than that. I just find it kind of ludicrous that people would go and try and rob a place that has security and has cameras and all that stuff that's required by the ordinance.
So we should also highlight the 5 pounds as something that we want to discuss. Okay.
Because it's arbitrary. I'm not saying it should be 20 or 50, but I'm just saying 5 pounds.
I'll certainly look at what some other options, what some other places are
Right.
considering. I don't know.
How much can people buy at one time?
Well, there's a limit to what you can possess. think it's, what is it?
2 pounds in 1
It's
pound or
an
something like that?
It's like an
It's
ounce.
an ounce.
Of dry marijuana, and then
for,
there's a separate amount of.
For recreational.
For medical, it's a lot. quite-
Medical is different, but there's a limit on the recreational, and I think it's an ounce.
Okay,
How many packs of cookies gets by?
okay. Anyone from the public? So right now, we are looking at the proposed ordinance and setting a public hearing. Do you want to have any further discussion tonight? Okay.
One question, if we give them these things to look into, are we gonna see them coming back at us at our next council meeting? And because the public hearing is gonna be on the 19th, and we're gonna have a council meeting the first Tuesday in December, so are we gonna have it, the information then, or are we gonna have it on the 19th?
Well, we would have it on the 19th. Could we have an additional discussion then, or no?
You could discuss it, just wouldn't have the public hearing till the 19th. Make
Right.
final decisions. Right.
Do you want to put it on the agenda to,
Yeah, on the upgrades, what they find, statistics, whatever, for December 5th. And then-
so
Right now,
review some data and information? We won't try to make any changes or decide anything at that time, but
Right.
we'll just have chief and staff bring back any other information that might help guide us.
Right,
Okay?
but have the public meeting still on the 19th.
In the public meeting on the 19th. Are you okay with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the only thing that might be a little difficult to come up with in that time frame would be if you want a draft overlay district. That might be a little bit more labor intensive.
That was just a thing of.
But, I mean, I can come up
That's
with
okay.
at least a map to take a look at to see how it would work.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, you wanted a revised draft that removed lounges,
Mhm.
and that was it, really?
Yeah, and I guess, and highlighted the zoning and the retail.
Sure,
and
yeah.
you know, kind of a simplified. I think everyone's fine with the changes from the attorney, right?
That's a decision
Yours
for the
are
city
in
council.
blue. No, I'm asking you. We're okay, right?
Well, I mean, there was one, I think in the initial draft, there was a part that said, well, actually, it said no on-site consumption. So if you're removing lounges, then we would put that
We can keep-
back in.
yeah, correct.
And I didn't really strike it, I just highlighted it because
Okay.
I wanted us to make sure that we tracked that depending on the council's decision concerning.
Yeah, and it's still in there, but that's something that would need to be adjusted depending on what decision is made for it. So I have that area highlighted. But yeah, if consumption's removed, we can fix that problem now.
So then there's no on-site consumption.
Yeah, on-site consumption.
Okay, so the first question is, is everyone in agreement that we'll add something to the agenda on our next meeting to hear any new data or information?
Yes, as long as we can get out here by 6:30.
Okay.
It's fine.
And of course, we would take any public input at that time, but we won't try and hash out the draft. We'll wait till the public hearing, right? Okay. And then next, we do have a suggested motion.
And just a reminder that the incorrect in the staff report on setting the public hearing for the 5th, it'd be the 19th that we're.
I think it's correct in the motion.
Motion?
Yeah. And Mireya just had to get her AAA card and said that she was ready to move forward. Do you need this?
Oh, did you want me to read that?
Somebody.
Suggested motion as it is. Move to introduce the proposed ordinance adding chapter 5.34 and amending chapter 17.08, 17.10, 17.11, and 17.13 of the Lakeport Municipal Code to permit and regulate commercial cannabis operations within the city of Lakeport and set forth a public hearing for December 19th, 2017. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, everyone, for all the work.
Lots of work.
Yeah. All right. Oh, so that was just the commercial. So our next item is the first reading of the proposed amendments to Chapter 17.38 of the zoning ordinance permitting personal cannabis cultivation and associated amendments to Chapter 1704, 05, 06, 1707, and the zoning ordinance. Kevin.
Good evening once again, honorable council members. As mentioned in the previous item, it was decided early on in the process to keep personal cannabis cultivation and commercial cannabis regulations as separate ordinances. This was primarily due to the fact that the city already has regulations in place for medical marijuana cultivation within the zoning ordinance that were established in 2013. Following the passage of Proposition 64 by the voters last November and the establishment of additional regulations regarding cannabis by the state legislature, primarily in SB 94, the Planning Commission first discussed the need to amend city regulations allowing personal cultivation provisions that were provided by the legalization of recreational cannabis in February of this year. At that public meeting, the overwhelming theme that was that the current ordinance wasn't broke, so don't fix it. Just kind of roll in the new provisions into it. And that was kind of the direction then that the working group kind of took in looking at what necessary regulations were needed to make it comply, make our existing medical marijuana cultivation ordinance comply with the new provisions outlined in Prop 64 and SB 94. Still, the final product, or the proposed product rather, is the no outdoor cultivation would still be is still the regulation. Cultivation would be limited to only be permitted in a detached, fully enclosed, and secure accessory structure limited to 80 square feet or a maximum of 6 plants. The Planning Commission reviewed the working group's recommendations at their October 11th and then ultimately made a recommendation to this body to consider the proposed revisions on November 8th. The minor amendments were mostly in regards to in the definition section, making them consistent with the new state terminology. There was a provision added allowing accessory structures to include greenhouses meeting very specific design criteria, and then also the removal of setback requirements or buffer zones that were required from schools, parks, and daycares that would no longer be permitted under state law. All in all, this was a real minimalist approach, relying heavily on the work that was supported by the community in 2013, and just a lot of changing of terminology, from removing the term marijuana and replacing with cannabis, reflecting the way it's addressed in state legislation now. But all in all, it would still be very similar to what's been working very well for both the police department and code enforcement around the city currently under the medical marijuana provisions. And once again, this is all we're doing for this is the first reading. We're just asking council to consider setting a public hearing for the consideration of this ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Any questions from the council? Anyone from the public? Okay, any discussion?
One thing, and it's trivial. On section 173850, F10, it talks about the 6-foot high fence, but it's opaque and not solid. Is there a reason for that? because if it wasn't a greenhouse, it had to be a solid fence.
Can you say that section again?
It's 173850, F10.
I'm trying to look at it. I've got all my items all confused now.
That's why I wrote it down.
Section 17.38.
50. Item F10.
Oh, that's specifically, that's the new language that was added to allow greenhouses that meet very specific standards, correct?
Right, and then the fence though is, in the other one up above it, it says it's a solid fence, which means wood. It can't be slats, it can't be tarpus and all that. But this one doesn't say solid, it says opaque, which means anything covering. The other one was bushes, didn't need bushes and stuff. So does this mean that they could have bushes around their greenhouse and that would be okay?
That would be because we stole this from Sutter County, and probably we need to probably make it consistent with ours, so that would be a good question to change, that it probably needs to be solid.
Good catch, George.
Very good.
Well, this is a fence around the greenhouse.
It's around it?
Yeah.
Yeah, not the actual greenhouse.
Not the greenhouse itself, but there's a thing in there saying about
The fence within the fence?
Yeah.
Okay, because I have to reread it. I think there, and thank you, Commission, we brought that in there because there is something short of a fully permitted building that would allow you to use sunlight. And so that's why we proposed that, while also having the rigid frame, the requirement that mitigate odor controls. But I think there was a sentence in there, so there was the hard frame with the poly stuff, and then there was the, what I call the dog kennel approach, which will allow basically fully enclosed in a chain link, but would require opaque, some type of opaque. So if that's the section, that may be the reference to the dog kennel fence and not the perimeter fence. So I just wanted to make sure which section you were looking at.
It reads, said structure shall be located in an area which is fully enclosed by an opaque fence at least 6 feet in height.
So it's
It's not
not referring to green, it's the
referring to,
perimeter
yet, to
Okay.
that section, which is a little later.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that was it. Thank you.
Okay. And the other thing it doesn't say is about setbacks. When you're talking about the other buildings that are actual buildings, they have to be, locked, and they have to have setbacks from the fence and stuff like that. This does not have that in it, as far as I can tell. And so does a greenhouse have to have setbacks or not?
That would be the intention, so if it's inadvertently,
Because if you look at, prior one where it was an actual structure, you'd have to have a setback.
because setbacks are noted in,
I should have wrote that one down.
yeah, and because we are exempting it from subsections 1 through 9, and setbacks are covered in 3.
Oh, okay.
So
It doesn't
yes,
have
that
that.
is so as written right now, it doesn't, but I don't believe that was the intention, so that's also another good catch.
Anything else, George?
No, but I did read it, see?
Well done. Any other questions or discussion? If not, we do have a motion.
Well, one more question.
Yes.
And this is not in this ordinance at all, but I was going to ask the chief. If someone is underage and is drinking, they basically lose their driver's license for a year type thing, or can't get a driver's license for a year. Is that still correct? Do you know?
If it relates to the driving, yes.
Okay, so if they get caught smoking marijuana and driving, is that going to be the same, or will the state laws be the same as alcohol?
Well, right now, that's not really, as of right now, you have the driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs,
So it would,
which is already
With
there,
your
but that's, you have to prove that somebody is impaired.
Right.
As far as, then you have another drunk driving section, which is if you're driving with 0.08% or more, then it's presumed that you were impaired.
Right.
Right now, there's no number on marijuana, there's no way to test for it, there's no court-approved equipment, so if somebody's driving and you can articulate that they're impaired, then you take an action against them. Right now, that's how the current law is as far as driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs.
My concern is people that are under the age of 21.
Right.
And so basically the rules that apply to drinking under the age of 21 would be applied to marijuana or cannabis under the age of 21, if you can prove it.
As they relate to driving?
Driving or even not driving.
Well, there's sections that you can take action on when it's not related to driving for the possession, illegal possession or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking if that's going to affect their driver's license.
Right.
That, I don't know that that's the case right now.
Okay. I was just kind of curious because, I was reading about the drinking underage. It could say that they can't have a license for a year type thing. And that's not even driving, it's just drinking underage. And so if marijuana or cannabis would be in that same situation, we're not sure for right now.
I'm not sure on that. I would have to do some more research, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. I'll do my own research too. Thank you.
Okay. We have a suggested motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to introduce the proposed ordinance amending Chapter 17.04, 17.05, 17.06, 17.07, and 17.38 of the Lakeport Municipal Code to permit and regulate personal cannabis cultivation within the city of Lakeport and set a public hearing for December 19th, 2017.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Kevin. Next, we're going to talk about a 10-wheel dump truck purchase. Doug?
Madam Mayor, Council, before you is a request from the Public Works Department for the purchase of a 2-wheel dump truck. This is it's basically really in two parts. It's a request for additional funding of $25,000, and then the approval for the city manager to sign the purchase order and the associated purchase agreements. As everyone is aware, our dump trucks that we've been using for the last 40 years are just about wore out. And so I know, Ken, I know. So what we're doing is coming to council and asking you guys to support us in updating our equipment. We did budget for this. Unfortunately, when not having purchased a lot of dump trucks recently, when we were talking with the truck broker, we didn't realize that when you say dump trucks, that just really means cab and chassis. That actually, I guess most people have a body or use a body, or they purchase their own dump body to put on the truck. So when we got our quotes back, we were under the impression that we were talking about a full dump truck with a dump bed on it. Most unfortunately, that was not the case. It was for just the truck and chassis, did not include the dump bed. So because of that, we have a short budget shortfall here, and we've gone through and we're looking at our roller purchase coming up, and also a utility vehicle for the Parks Department. We've been able to save some money on those. And so what we're asking is that we'll be allowed to take the savings that we're anticipating from those purchases and apply it towards a dump truck plus an additional 25,000 to give us the total amount for the purchase of the 10-wheel dump truck.
Now that comes with the bed, right?
That one is with the bed, Tim, yes, with a dump bed.
Is there any way we could take the 2 dump trucks you have now and weld the 2 beds together to make the 10? Never mind.
That's a possibility, George. I would have to talk with our mechanic on that one, though.
Any other questions? Anyone from the public? We have a suggested motion if there's no other discussion.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the budget adjustment for an additional $25,000 for the purchase of a 10-wheeler dump truck and authorize the city manager to sign the associated purchase order and purchase agreement as long as it's for the whole truck.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Doug. Good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have a police vehicle purchase. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. What you have before you is a request for the police department to purchase 2 fully outfitted 2018 Dodge Charger patrol vehicles. We have put out the specifications of what we need in those vehicles as far as the vehicles themselves and the equipment, and we've received back 3 separate bids. Number 1 from auto dealers, number 2 from emergency vehicle outfitting companies, and then number 3 would be a sole source item, which is a MAV unit from WatchGuard that we're already using in other vehicles. So those are the three items we have. We're recommending that the city council approve the lowest bidder on the vehicle, and then approve the lowest bidder on the emergency vehicle outfitter with use of the 10% local preference that the council has the authority to use, and then that part is not necessary with the WatchGuard units. But the total cost would be not to exceed $45,583.26 per each outfitted vehicle. So that'd be that amount times 2. It's already approved by your council in the operating budget that we have. We currently have $115,000 available in that operating budget for vehicle purchases. So that's the situation.
So who gets to drive the new cars?
That actually hasn't been final determination made on that yet.
Do you want us to decide for you?
I know George wants to.
One thing I was going to ask is also in the budget that we approved, you were going to get a Tahoe. And is that something you're looking at down the road still, or?
Yes, sir. What's happening with the Chevy Tahoe is right now we have an application into USDA for grant funds for that vehicle. We don't yet know. I'm expecting that we're going to get approval towards the end of this budget year, but we don't have any idea right now on the amount or anything like that. So once we get confirmation on what USDA is willing to give us, then I hope to have enough left to pay the city's portion and then move forward with that vehicle, because the original plan was to get a Tahoe and 2 cars in this budget year, but we don't want to give up the opportunity of getting USDA funds, and that's not something we can move forward until we get a final approval from them on the amount. So we're just going to wait on that until we hear back from USDA. I can tell you the finance director and I, we did get a couple questions, and we both submitted additional written documentation to the USDA to try to satisfy their concerns on why we needed this vehicle for a rural agency.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone from the public? Okay, if there's no further discussion, we'll take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to Move to authorize the city manager to sign a purchase order and support documents for the proclamation, to get procurement of the 2 fully equipped 2018 Dodge Charger police vehicles with the police department using the lowest bidding vendors, Thurston Auto, Precision Wireless, and the sole source of NAV vendor WatchGuard.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, council communications. Okay.
Council, I was wondering if you would entertain the idea of having our council meeting on December 4th instead of the 5th. There's 3 of us that have prepaid training that REMIP is going to reimburse us for, 5th, 6th, 7th. So that meeting is still scheduled, but we had a very light meeting that the other staff could handle. But discussing the cannabis would be really important for myself and Kevin to be here. So I was wondering if council would be available on the 4th if we...
That's fine with me. Are we talking about campus?
Monday the 4th?
We did.
We're discussing. We're not going to do anything, but we're going to discuss options.
Yeah. Because,
Everybody good? Okay.
as long as everybody's available. Okay.
Yeah, I knew you guys had that and I was a little worried.
Yeah, no, I think it's good that we're going to discuss this again, but I was just hoping that we can do it another day, so I appreciate that. Thank you. And so, having said that, we are going to be gone on the afternoon of the 5th.
We'll make sure we do the appropriate public outreach.
Yes, we'll make sure the press puts out that we're going to be here on the 4th instead of the 5th, so thank you. We'll make sure we get that word out
Okay.
to everyone.
Thank you. David?
Thank you.
Nothing to report?
Doug?
Well, I was really hoping to lead that discussion on the 5th. I guess I just got cut out of that.
That's why she did it.
I only had one thing. I was asked about the asphalt situation with our intersections that we're having in Main Street. And I'm going to give just a very brief explanation of that. If anybody really wants to know, it's a little bit entailed, and I know we've all had a really long meeting, so I'd be more than glad to have lunch or get together with anyone that would like more information at any time that's convenient. But basically what's happened is we use the Caltrans specifications for our road projects. And Caltrans is the premier roadway builder and maintainer in the state of California. And typically they do a very good job. What's happened over the years is that the asphalt emulsion is actually a real thing. The reason they call it asphalt was the oil was asphalt oil. That supply has become very dwindled and is basically almost non-existent. To my knowledge, there's only one company left in California that you can even get real asphalt oil from. So what's had to happen is being that the raw asphalt oil that we used in years past, it had to be basically amended. So they've added all of these polymer elements to stretch the oil out, the use of the oil, and it's really changed the chemical makeup of the binder that holds all the aggregate together, which used to be asphalt oil. Caltrans, and it's a blend, okay? So Caltrans came up with blends for zones. So in other words, they looked at the state of California and they said, okay, in zone 1, our concern is freezing temperatures. And so we want a blend that deals with freezing temperatures. And they looked at zone 2, or the desert, and they said, oh, we're gonna call this zone 2. And what our concern for our emulsion blend here is extreme high temperatures. So we're gonna blend these oils to deal with those weather extremes, because typically you don't get a place that gets consistent freezing weather plus consistent, 120 degree weather. except Lakeport. Well, actually, Mendocino County is having issues in Lake County, and it's a statewide issue, because what has happened is the temperature ranges that we run here are exceeding the polymer abilities. So we were in the, what would be called zone 1, or the colder zone. We were not, our zoning here was not classified as being hot desert type of weather. So we used the blend that, and even everybody uses up here for the cooler weather. And what we're finding happening is that during the extreme temperatures that we are experiencing in the summer now, those blends are starting to move. Okay, they're actually starting to come back to life, and the asphalt is getting soft, and then it is starting to move. And it's not just Lakeport. If you noticed on any of the new paving going, that Caltrans has been putting down, there was a really bad example of this happening where you turned into Potter Valley. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but when people were going into that corner, it actually shoved the asphalt up about a 1 foot lift along the edge of the road. It had got that hot and moved that much with a traffic load on it. So right now there's a mad scramble in Caltrans to try to figure out how to modify, the formulas so that we don't get these kind of issues. And unfortunately, there's really nothing can be done about it. It's kind of like concrete. Once it's mixed up and once it's made and it's put down, then that's it. There's no going back and, there's not pulling the board off and re-nailing it on. It's down. So what does that mean to us? What that means to us is eventually at some point in time, we'll have to come in and mill those areas out and, and put in another lift of asphalt in those intersection areas. We are not doing that until we have a comfort level with a new blend that they're going to come out with to deal with the freezing weather we have plus the hot summer weather. And believe me, there is a lot of good minds working on this right now. So we're really hoping that Caltrans is going to be coming out within the next 12 months with some kind of a fix to this problem, because it's not just us, it's everybody.
So what we want is a 1.5 blend, right?
1 3/4, I think, George.
Got it.
And I appreciate Doug bringing that up, because
Yeah.
we're getting a lot of questions about the
Yeah, thanks for the
intersection. And it's not
explanation.
the contractor's fault that put it in, because they were following the Caltrans standards, so.
Yeah,
we're
people do want to
working
know
through
why.
this. Yeah,
Right.
There's 2 little rivers down
Yeah.
the road.
yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Doug.
You're
Nick?
welcome.
Yeah, just really quick. Last week, the finance department completed working with the police department to allow the public to make payments on tickets and dog licenses and PD related items down at the police department. So the public no longer has to come up to City Hall to make the payment and then visit both locations to solve any ticket issues.
Great. Chief?
Nothing really. I don't know if you guys heard the sirens, but I guess we had a foot pursuit and an officer was punched in the face and bitten. So apparently he's okay, but
Bitten?
yeah, that's what it sounds like. I'm gonna go check on it once we get down here. But
Okay.
hopefully everything's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen in Logan.
Kevin?
You heard enough from me tonight.
Never. Kelly?
Promise not to talk about cannabis. So we have, I just wanted to let the public know and the city council that there are several openings on various commissions. We have, we believe we're anticipating an opening on the planning commission. And we have, I think, 3 openings on LEDAC. And I believe 2 seats expiring on the Parks and Rec Commission. So we're just encouraging interested parties to apply, and also encouraging the council to invite applications of those people that you know may be interested. It's always really good when we have a good turnout on these recruitments, and we've been recruiting our little hearts out, but we haven't had a lot of response yet, so.
So that was planning,
Planning, there's one, yeah, Parks and Recreation, I believe there's two.
I think 2 on lead
and
out.
lead that.
And lead out,
Three.
I think that's 3. 3.
Okay.
Regardless, there's
Yeah,
openings.
there's openings.
Okay, got it.
Are those LEDAC openings general LEDAC membership, or are they one
Yes.
of the assigned?
They're
Okay.
the at-large.
general.
Yeah.
If they want to apply, do they
They
call
can-
you on your
yes,
cell
they-
phone?
They can, no.
No,
You have the application online?
The applications are online, yeah. they're-
They are online, and they can call the city clerk's office, you can call City Hall. And, or they can stop by City Hall.
They want to know more about that actual position, you're welcome to call
Yeah, I
us.
believe it's still posted up in Hot Topics, which is right on the front webpage, so.
Yeah.
There's links.
Thanks, Kelly. Councilmember Burke?
Nothing to report, but have a good Thanksgiving.
Councilmember Sutton? Councilmember Barnes?
Nothing to report.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I want to give a shout out for the upcoming Dickens Christmas Fair.
Oh, yes.
That's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, Saturday.
Yeah, it's Saturday.
Saturday, and the tree lighting is at 5:30.
They're going to have a couple of tents this year in Museum Square because they don't trust the weather like they got rained out last year. So.
Yeah, that's hard when it rains.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Brutal. But it's so fun.
And I'm also looking forward to the California League of Cities League Leaders meeting in Santa Cruz, where we'll get together with other, Stacy, president of policy committee meetings and different sections of the cities to start hashing through priorities for next year. That should be a really good opportunity.
First.
Yeah.
Get rid of them all.
That's all. Thank you.
All right, happy Thanksgiving, Lakeport. Meeting adjourned.